Okay, welcome to Sprint 121 review. I'll do the sprint statistics. Carol will do the community update. Harpreet on UI. Adam will do providers. Tina on automate. Joe on platform. Alberto API. Suyog documentation, and Mike on QE. So we had 237 PRs merged. I believe there might be a couple new repos that I have to check, so that number might be bumped up the following sprint. But we had the top three repos are ManageIQ, UI Classic, and integration tests, and these, there they are. That's them. So we had 294 PRs open, as we said, with 237 merged and 393 still open. And here are the PRs by label. And there are a lot of PRs that don't have labels. So when you do add one, just try and remember to add a specific label. It helps with when we do reporting. And here's the health report. Not that much activity. There were some additions to some of the repos, had either more files or some taken away. That's why there's a little bit of churn everywhere. And over to Carol.
Thank you, John. So this is a short community update. Actually, not much has happened in the last 2 weeks, but the last time I did not manage to put the blog posts for the eventual GA release into the sprint, so sharing it this time. So probably most of you have already seen it or know about it, but if you haven't, take a look and feel free to share it and enjoy the new release. That's all. Thank you. And next slide, please.
Thanks, Carol. Hi, everyone. Total 52 PRs merged across the UI repos. Out of that, there were 7 enhancements, 29 bug fixes, and so on. So for enhancements, create snapshot button was added to configuration menu on VM details screen. Previously, user had to drill into snapshots VM screen to create a snapshot. Change was made to use standard Rails methods to serve up customized icons in Catalog Explorer. Tagging info was added to generic object details view. Support was added to be able to copy an existing service request. This feature was only available for VM provisioning request and configured system requests. And region ID information was added to list of subscriptions in Configuration Explorer. And finally, the toolbars was rewritten into React. And for the bugs, when we have lots of notifications coming in at the same time, they can take up significant amount of space on the screen. So this change throttles the amount of toasts by maximizing one toast in 0.5 seconds, and also doesn't allow displaying more than 3 toasts at the time by removing older ones. And the next 3 items are PRs merged to fix issues around abandoned changes pop-up in new data-driven forms on the new tagging screens, and also on some of the existing Angular forms. And a fix was made in dialog editor to validate entered value in date control and date time control fields. Also in service UI, a fix was made to sanitize and display the job output properly on the screen. And that's all I have for the UI. Over to Adam.
Thanks, Harpreet. So for the Azure provider, Dan B fixed an issue with Azure events not being returned sorted by timestamp, causing us to miss events because they were returning an older timestamp as the last event, and so we were actually querying the next page and missing some in the middle. So he had a good fix to sort by the timestamp based on the events that we got, and then do the query based on the maximum timestamp in that page. And then I fixed an issue where parsing that timestamp, we were trying to do get 2 minutes previously, but it was doing a subtraction on a string, and so we just had to parse that into a time object to get that fixed. On Azure Stack, so XLab added a new developer, Monka, and her first PR was to extend the network manager inventory collection to include collecting cloud networks, cloud subnets, and network ports. It was a great first PR, specs and everything. Really, really nice work there. She then followed up with adding versioned collectors. So the Azure API has two main versions, and they were a bunch of conditionals through the code saying, if it's version this, collect this, otherwise don't. So they subclass the collector so that they don't have to do those checks, and they just only collect things for those particular versions in that version collector. So it cleaned up the code a good bit. Next slide. On the Kubernetes side, this one had been open for a long time, but the specs hadn't been passing, and Benny kind of poked me to get it over the line. So a while ago, the Kubernetes added the ability to specify a limit to the collections. And so, for example, if you have a lot of container images, we saw some of the collection responses in the multiple gigabytes of size. And if you don't specify a limit, Kubernetes and OpenShift will try to return all of them in one page. That takes a lot of memory on the OpenShift side because they need to actually collect it, build it up, and then return it. It also could lead to API timeouts if they can't build that response fast enough, and so it was causing refresh errors. So some users of ManageIQ and OpenShift were seeing memory spikes, timeouts, refresh errors, and we suspected that this would have fixed it. And so we're now passing a limit to the API collections that we have and processing them in pages. So that was a really nice kind of backend improvement that should make refresh more stable on large OpenShift and Kubernetes deployments. As part of that, I found an issue with the OpenShift VCR generation. So they have a nice tool which, if you point it at a minishift or a blank Kubernetes cluster, it'll actually build up the environment that's used to record the VCRs. There are a couple of issues that were preventing that from working just because it hadn't been run in probably a year. So a nice little fix to that. Next slide. OpenStack fixed an issue with an invalid template class in refresh that was causing refresh to fail. They also fixed an error message of snapshot create failed. This is another one that had been open for a long time that landed this sprint. So Boris had been working on redoing how they model overt networks. So before they tried to maintain sort of the one switch per host and a bunch of LANs under that, it turned out that overt networking is actually a lot more similar to VMware distributed virtual switches, and so they redid that old modeling that we had before we did DV switches on VMware, and now they're actually modeling those cluster level switches as shared switches and VNIC profiles as LANs. So before they were doing a lot of work to try to make it fit an older modeling format, and now this actually flows a lot nicer. Some of the benefits are we're actually collecting VNIC profiles which are required to provision VMs. So what they were doing was, in the provision dialogues, when they were going through and collecting, pick the network that you want to put this VM on, they were actually doing a live call out to the provider to be able to get that list, which is really bad and indicative of a problem with the inventory refresh. So we fixed that, removed calls direct to the provider during provisioning, which is just really, really nice fix. And continuing on the data-driven form parameters, we added that for overt, and we're going through the rest of the providers, and hopefully we'll have them done next sprint. Further the effort to reduce the provider-specific logic in the UI. And for VMware, we added the ability to collect what are called opaque networks and switches, which are actually NSX switches. It's their representation in the Vim API. And so if you have NSX and you have some networks and switches created, we'll be able to collect them in inventory. And spoiler alert, next sprint we'll be able to use them for provisioning. But so that was a nice fix, a nice enhancement. And on the streaming refresh side, we now have the ability to have a user force a full refresh, similar to what you'd be able to do if you were doing classic refresh. But now if you do refresh relationships and power states from the UI, it'll restart the streaming collector and it'll do a full when it starts up. And that's it for providers. Over to Tina.
Thanks, Adam. Good morning. We had 14 PRs merged this sprint. Lucy made some logging changes to filter dialog protected values. As Adam said, Boris added VNet events for Rev as part of the network remodeling work. Drew fixed the retirement issue where a user with an invalid group was failing and now will fault to the tenant admin. Drew enhanced the automation request scheduler to honor date and time. Lucy made a change to enable the custom button open URL to support other object types. Eric fixed the virtual infra switch dialog issue. Drew fixed the MIQ schedule import issue. Fabian removed more Automate code as part of an ongoing effort to remove the V2V functionality from Automate. And finally, Jay modified the Automate engine find by calls as part of the ongoing effort to deprecate the find by methods. That's it for Automate. Next slide, over to Joe.
Thank you, Tina. This sprint saw 21 PRs merged in the platform space. With enhancements, Joe R contributed one that will allow orphaned workers to be killed. Libor continued to extend report filtering with support for more fields. Adam made two enhancements, one to allow run single worker method to set active server roles when starting the worker, and the other to add a method server role name equals to the MIQ server model. For bugs, Libor fixed an issue with importing of schedules by using the user argument from the import-export schedule script. Libor also fixed an issue where non-admin users were presented with erroneous error messages when accessing the containers page. Nickel addressed an issue where standard output was missing from the SSUI page by fixing job plays for the API. Nickel also fixed an issue with embedded Ansible database migrations by handling faulty V2 keys. Adam contributed a bug fix for an exception where the wrong method was being called by the worker runner. And I fixed an issue where the appliance console CLI would exit with a shell success code even when it failed. Next slide, and on to technical debt and refactoring. Libor removed the unused scope with EMS from the VMware template model. Joe R bumped the bundled VCR gem versions. Yuri removed the no longer used configuration option that had allowed us to switch from Puma back to Thin in case we ran into issues when we first started using Puma. Libor simplified the expression in MIQ reports get time zone method, and Keenan contributed a couple of Rails upgrade related improvements. And lastly, for continuous integration and testing, Keenan, Brandon, and Joe R contributed a few PRs that I won't list each one of, but the links are there. And that's it for the platform space, and on to Alberto for the rest of the story.
Thanks, Joe.
Thank you.
So for the API, we have one enhancement that came in by David H. Here we enhanced the options verb for providers so that we can expose the DDF schema. So you can request, as you see in the example, the DDF schema for a particular provider type, and that's useful for allowing the UI to drive the provider create form with all the necessary fields for that form. So, and that's it for the API.
Okay, Suyog won't be here, so they had 10 PRs merged in documentation, 7 were bugs, 3 are enhancements, and there's a list of some of the PRs. If you have any questions, just contact Suyog. Over to Mike.
All right, I've been having some issues with my laptop this morning. Can you confirm you can hear me all right?
Yeah, Mike, go ahead.
Okay, great. Okay, so QE had 49 PRs merged, with 30 of those dedicated to fixing tests, fixing our framework, and to adding new tests. That'd be automation and manual test cases for some tests. We do have a new label created so that we can collect some metrics and provide some metrics based on when we are automating existing manual test coverage. We had some significant updates to our requirement freezing process. We still test off of a frozen list of requirements, but we've managed to upgrade all of our Python requirements, but 2 or 3, thanks to John Dupuy. This allows us to very explicitly determine what dependencies that we directly have and what version restrictions they have. We've created a marker for browser isolation so that we can mark high-risk tests that may put the browser into an unusable state for following tests. We have our rel testing marker has been updated. What test cases are marked with that. This is a marker that we use to indicate tests that are interacting with the base OS. We've fixed migration issues related to zone, server, and region. Thanks to Tassos for those updates and his coming updates in order to fix our use of the current identifier for servers, zones, and or for servers and zones at least. We also have an upcoming collection and entities refactor for our configuration management provider model coming from John Dupuy, and I'm working on a PyTest 5.1 upgrade. And that's it from QE. Thanks, guys.
Okay, and before we end, Jason has something to say, but this next sprint is in 2 weeks on October 16th. That will be sprint 122, and over to Jason.
Okay, just want to add one more thing. Brandon and I have been working in the past couple weeks on replacing ManageIQ.org with a GitHub Pages-based website, since our entire website was static anyway. So we have a new repo called ManageIQ.github.io that hosts the static files, but it still works the same way. If you want to contribute to the website, you either hit the ManageIQ docs repo for the documentation, the ManageIQ guides for the developer setup, or the ManageIQ.org repo for the main website itself. When any of PRs get merged in any of those, it kicks off a build over in ManageIQ.github.io, and then the website gets updated automatically. And that's it.
Okay, thanks, Jason. So that's it. That's the end of the sprint. Thanks, and have a good day.